Hello and welcome everyone to our Dr. Joe Live for November 23rd, 2021. My name is Adam Boyce and I'll be your host on the call today. We have a very special guest with us today, and to celebrate, we're going to be using video to conduct the call. If your device is capable of streaming video content, then please turn it on now. Our guest today is a distinguished professor of psychological and brain sciences. He's currently the director of the Meta Lab and the Center for Mindfulness and Human Potential at the University of California in Santa Barbara. His name is Professor Jonathan Schooler, and we are so delighted and honored that he's joining us today on Dr. Joe Live. Our topic today is resonance, essence of information. Dr. Joe will introduce you to Professor Schooler very shortly, but first I'd like to welcome Dr. Joe to the call. Hello, Dr. Joe.
Hi, Adam. Thank you so much for hosting the call. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining. One of the things that I love to do in my personal life is to have engaging conversations where we come to a greater understanding by exchanging information and exchanging knowledge. And I was, before the pandemic, I was in the gym one day early in the morning, and this guy kept looking at me and he said, "Hey, are you Joe Dispenza?" And I said, "No, gosh," I said, "everybody," I didn't say no, I said, "Gosh, everybody tells me I look like him." And he kind of started to walk away, and he kind of walked back and he said, "Wow, you really sound like him too. You really sound a lot like him." And then we started laughing. He said, "Hey, I'm a massage therapist in town, and I have an office at this clinic that was a specific clinic that did brain scans and EEG and neurofeedback. And I had passed that clinic so many times on my drive when I was moving in and out of town, quite a bit because I was traveling. I always wanted to stop there and just say, "Hey, what are you guys into? What are you doing?" But never really had a moment. So I got to know this massage therapist, and of course it was our current brain science team's clinic. And so I got into speaking with them a little bit, and then went to their clinic, and they invited me to a bit of wine and up at their house, and they said, "We're going to have some fun guests, and come on, just stop by for sunset." And so I went there, and as soon as I walked in, I met this really cool inventor person, that engineer that I never made it past that point because I had a really fun conversation with this guy. And my youngest son calls Alan a cross between Jerry Garcia and Einstein, and he's a very cool guy, and he's very inventive and super creative, and has done a lot of amazing things. Anyway, so I was just getting to know Tiff and Nick, and we sat down. We were all sitting at the table, and we started talking about a lot of the scans that we had been seeing, and a lot of the things we noticed during that transcendental moment that we've been working on isolating. And Tiff was asking a lot of questions, and Amanda, Jonathan Schooler's fiance, was there, and we were just talking, engaging, and Jonathan was sitting right across from me. And I think, I reached a certain point where I was talking so much, I just said, "Hey, what does everybody do?" And we never got to Jonathan, So long story short, I went to breakfast with Alan one morning, and he was telling me about some of the research he was doing. And I was talking about some of the things that I was doing, and he said, "God, you should really meet Jonathan Schooler. You should really meet him because he's got such a wealth of knowledge in the area that you're exploring." And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to meet him. It would be great." And then I was driving, when I got back to my home, there was a text. He said, "Oh my God, Jonathan was at that dinner and he was sitting right across from you." And I thought, "Oh my God, here's Jonathan Schooler, the guy who runs the Meta Lab at UCSB, and a super intelligent, great scientist." And he never said a word. He was so humble and so sweet and so interested, and never had any need to say anything. He just was just super present and really engaged in the information. So then, of course, I said to Jonathan, let's all get together again. So we went to Alan's house, and I got to know him a little bit more. And then we went to dinner a few times, and no, we went to dinner once, and we talked about all kinds of amazing things. And he's such a great guy. He's a really open-minded, great researcher, and has become a friend of mine. So, Jonathan, I just wanted to welcome you to our community and to join us on the call.
Thanks, Joe. It's a real pleasure to be here. This may be the first time anyone has introduced me as being the quiet one. But,
well, you certainly were that night, and it was a great introduction. But so if you could just start off by talking about what your interest is at the Meta Lab there, some of the cool science that you've discovered about resonance brain coherence, and then give the audience a kind of an idea of what you're currently doing. I think it'd be super fun and exciting. I might interrupt you here and there just because you're saying something really great, but yeah, tell us about your lab. Tell us about a little bit about brain resonance and what you're interested in.
Sure. Well, it's a pleasure to discuss these topics. So I'm interested in a broad range of different topics, most of which surround the general question of consciousness. And we've been doing a lot of research on mindfulness and its relationship to mind wandering. And basically, people mind wander all the time, and mindfulness seems to be an antidote. And we've been developing an app called Finding Focus, where we have introduced that into high schools around the country to encourage high school students to learn how to manage their attention. But one interest that has really been a core interest for us for a while is the question about what sort of the way consciousness is represented in the mind. How does consciousness come to be, and how does it organize itself? And one key thing that we think is really important is, as you mentioned, the notion of resonance. That is, that particular parts, networks in the brain may resonate together at particular frequencies, and when they resonate in sync with each other, that is the binding that now enables consciousness to arise. And what we speculate is that you may basically have these nested levels of rhythms, much like an orchestra. In fact, we think that that music provides a really beautiful metaphor for the way that the mind is organized. And so, just as in music, you can have very fast beats, which are synchronized with slower beats and synchronized with still slower beats. We think that the mind organizes itself in that way, basically producing a symphony of orchestrated but synchronized rhythms that together create the conscious experience that you and I both enjoy. I saw you about to interrupt me there, so happy to let you jump in.
No, that was so relevant for our community. And that concept of the synchronization that takes place in the brain, do you think that when we call that coherence, and we say what syncs in the brain links in the brain. So if you can imagine networks of neurons all dancing to the same rhythm, orchestrating and harmonizing to one another, I guess my question is, when that level of order takes place in the brain, or that synchronization takes place in the brain, is there an exchange of information because of the coherent patterns? Is the result of what's created out of that an experience of mind, or experience of a greater level, a different consciousness, or how do you connect those?
Yeah, exactly. The idea is basically that the synchronization is what enables the information exchange. But it's critical to also emphasize this notion of it being hierarchically stacked. So, for example, when someone has an epileptic seizure, their whole brain is resonating in one particular thing, but it's all at one level. There's not this hierarchical stack thing, and that seems to be really important. So we actually have been distinguishing between three different kinds of synchrony. You have full-on synchrony, where every part is going at exactly the same time. Boom, boom. You have coherence, where they're in sync, but they're in at different times. So boom, 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 but in alignment with each other. And then you have cross-frequency coupling, where you've got a faster rate, bing, 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 and then a slower rate. So it'd be bing, bing. I'm having trouble with my coordination here, but they're basically synced, with one going at a faster level than the other. And between these three mechanisms of the synchrony, the coherence, and the cross-frequency coupling, that allows for both the sort of distribution of separate rhythms and yet still this combined connection.
Sure. So we could call that kind of then, in a sense, harmonics when you're talking about cross-frequency coupling. And it's an interesting idea, because as the brain begins to become more orderly in and of itself, it does are other neurons recruited in the process? Because what we see in our work is we see this kind of harmonic as standing waves. So one wave is beating like at the base, but there's a rhythm that's going on that's adding to the music, and it's also coherent, but it may not be a theta rhythm. It may be more of a low alpha rhythm, and then that starts to dance, and it's in harmonics. It's just at a different beat, but still in rhythm. And then you see this kind of escalation takes place as a result of that, and we start seeing people moving into beta, and you think, oh my God, what's happening here? And then they cross through high beta at times, and they move into these gamma states, and it seems that there are carrier waves of harmonics that seem, if you could stay present, that the interference of those patterns or those frequencies tend to cause more energy to be improved in the brain. And energy and consciousness somehow, or energy and information, seem to be coupled in a very unique way. So the idea of that standing wave is really kind of like a harmonic that's taking place in the nervous system. Would you say?
Yeah. Everything you said fits really very nicely into the way that we think about it, and it's definitely intriguing that there can be variations in the degree to which you're getting this resonance between the different levels, and that really getting the orchestra tightly in sync up and down the different levels may lead to particularly unique and perhaps even elated state. So I think this is a really promising direction. And it's also interesting to think, so you were going all the way up to gamma, but it's also interesting to think about going to even slower levels. And one thing that we've been thinking about is also looking at the relationship between the various different brain rhythms and other rhythms of the body, in particular the heart. And of course, you've talked about heart rate variability, and this seems to be very relevant as well, but also possibly the gastric system and other rhythms as well. And so there may be varying degrees of sort of tunedness between these different systems, but all potentially being sort of organized collectively through perhaps a very low frequency carrier wave.
Oh, I love that, because that's autonomic regulation, right? And so different information can be carried on those different frequencies, right? That may have instructions for different systems in the body, whether, albeit the gastrointestinal system, the cardiovascular system, whether it has to do with a hormonal system, somehow the cascade that's created when there's autonomic regulation, I would term that a greater expression of order, a greater expression of health, right? And then the autonomic dysregulation that comes from living in survival and living in stress, and the need to try to control everything in your life, and try to predict what's going to happen next, and it causes networks to fire out of sync, out of resonance. They no longer couple and exchange information, because that's what incoherence does. It knocks the nervous system out of order, right? And from the hormones of stress. So speaking from my present state of ignorance, I believe that when there's this kind of order that takes place in the nervous system, it's the information that's being carried on those coherent patterns are really instructing cells and hormones and systems to do what they do in more order and more balance. So then, you know, from the way I think about it is, what is synchronizing the nervous system to do that, right? And it has to be when it has a moment to move out of survival, and a person tends to open their awareness or open their mind up to possibility, to take their attention off the material world, off the known. And we see that when people put their attention on nothing, or just on space, that there tends to be this kind of order that takes place. And somehow there seems to be an entrainment to the nervous system. So I love that you used the word elation, because that's what we're discovering, is that the arousal that's created in the nervous system when the nervous system's tuning itself to energy, and the operator for a moment is resting and pausing and relaxing to a point where they move out of survival, and all of a sudden, you know, if they could really switch that system off and convert to a different nervous system, what we've discovered is when people start breathing as a form of rhythm and put their attention on their heart and start switching from fear or anger, or resentment or impatience or judgment, or any of those states, to a more elevated state, to an elevated emotional state. It being Thanksgiving, we could say giving thanks for their life for no reason but that they're alive. That when the heart starts beating in its own coherence, its own rhythm, that it begins to inform the brain that it's actually safe to create again, right? And so the brain moves out of those high incoherent beta states, and you start to see this dropping down into alpha, which of course is the more creative state. And that's where we can kind of dream, and we can kind of imagine, and we can start thinking of other possibilities. And the brain is saying, the heart's informing the brain, or the body's informing the brain, that the creative center is switched on, and there's other possibilities that you can become aware of, and the brain starts reorganizing itself. I think the word elation is when there's so much coherence, there's so much rhythm taking place in the nervous system, that connection, or that moment does produce more of an elevated state. When that elevated state happens, I think the person begins to entrain their autonomic nervous system to do it more naturally. And I think that if you keep doing it, I think you can make it a skill.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a lot of really intriguing ideas there that I would love to see more research investigate. I think the notion that people can engage in certain kinds of entrainments that can lead to this kind of synchronization is really a very powerful idea, and it harkens back to ancient rituals. For example, you know, with the drum ceremonies that have been used, probably throughout, certainly throughout recorded history, and long before that. And I think the music one of the reasons why music may be so powerful is also the kind of entrainment that it can produce. But I think it's also really interesting, and I'd love to see more research, and I'm glad that you're fostering this on the sort of the more remarkable sort of mystical-like states that people can have, and that certainly have been reported in some of your week-long events. And I think that understanding the particular resonances associated with those more unusual states is a really fascinating direction for further research. And then also something that we've talked about before, I'm very interested in the impact of having had these mystical-like experiences. When you have this experience of a sort of sense of non-duality between yourself and the rest of the world, how does that change the way you look at the world? There's research, for example, in psychedelics, finding that when people have had mystical-like experiences during psychedelics, that they have greater openness to experience afterwards, sustained even for a year. And and this seems to be mediated by the degree to which they have mystical-like experiences during those things. But there's no reason to think that it has to be limited to psychedelics. So the types of experiences that you're able to produce in your workshops may similarly produce that kind of increased openness to experience, which involves greater creativity, curiosity, and a whole set of qualities that I think the world could use more of.
Huh. Well, we're so interested in that, and I think when there's that kind of resonance that takes place in the brain and there's an entrainment, I think we have access to information that we typically don't have access to. And whether it's from an exogenous substance that people use like a plant medicine, or the brain's latent systems become activated and produce similar cascades of chemistry that's carrying information that's traveling from frequency that is not from the senses in the material world. The transcendental moment, the experience that they have, normally when I listen to them, you just can't make that stuff up. And when you see a brain doing that, you know the person is not faking it, or they're not contriving anything. They're having a moment that's very real to them. And what comes with this is that kind of sense of non-duality, that sense of wholeness, that sense of connection. It was always there, I just was unaware of it. Oh my God, that experience then, quite a bit in that moment, is reorganizing, I believe, or experience enriches the brain. It's repatterning maybe subtle networks of a mind that they have access to if they keep doing that. That has to be in a similar resonance. So the brain begins to create new circuitry, and I believe that some illusion, some conditioning, some habituation of the way we perceive or interact in the world is removed, and we see things more the way they really are. And so now the brain is wired to perceive more. And I think that in millions of years of survival, being a human being just 200 years ago wasn't easy. And I think the brain kind of had to put its attention on the things that were the most vital in survival: predators, objects, material world. And we've edited out quite a bit of energy and information. So the research shows that the mathematical probability of us perceiving all there is to reality is actually zero. So but we can't exclude ourselves from that equation. So the brain enriches its circuitry, and all of a sudden our spectrum of reality may broaden a little bit. We see possibilities a bit more, but the feeling that the person feels, that elation, that ecstasy, that arousal, that bliss, whatever they want to call it, somehow is moving the body out of trauma. It's moving it out of the past. The body's living by the same emotional state. It's so objective, it's believing it's living the same conditions in the past environment. And somehow this elevated emotion tends to move the body out of the past into the present moment. And the side effect of that was what we're discovering is some type of upgrade biologically in the person's health, some type of change that takes place in their expression of life, whether it be a disease, whether it be an injury, whether it be a trauma, that was somehow the body was staying the same. Somehow energy was informing matter in this very unique way, and the information was being recorded in the nervous system. And the person tends to be more open to possibility, and what they tend to do also is to know. On some level, they just know something about themselves or about life that you can't take away from them. And I think that when that occurs, I think you can't go back to being the same person again. Or if you witness it, and in another person who had stage 4 cancer, and now there's no evidence of stage 4 cancer anywhere in their body, even the metastasis, And it's happening in no time. It cannot be a matter-to-matter Newtonian classical physics phenomenon. It tends to be quantum. It tends to be energy somehow informing matter, and the person can't go back to being the same person again. Somehow there's a renewal that takes place in their mind and body.
So again, a lot of rich things there. I do want to put out. I come from a sort of very conventional academic background, and where certain claims are oftentimes sort of dismissed out of hand. And I think that that's a mistake of oftentimes in my colleagues to sort of rule out, like there are many, I would say maybe even the majority of my colleagues just won't even entertain the possibility that quantum effects play any serious role in consciousness or in healing. And from my perspective, that's short-sighted of them. Now, the perspective that I take is something that I call entertaining without endorsing, where I think it's really important to consider these types of what I would consider conjectures, and then investigate them rigorously. And so the types of mechanisms that you're describing with respect to how the synchronization, particularly associated with these non-dual states, cause a change in the way that people think, that then leads to quantum effects that impact their health, I think is a really intriguing, what I would call conjecture worthy of entertaining. And certainly I would caution my conservative colleagues about just dismissing that out of hand. But at the same time, I would, sort of urge, and I'm glad there's doing this, and I think it's really important to continue to doing this, to really sort of dig down on these types of mechanisms, and also possibly considering other possible ways in which, even if it seems quite plausible that people are getting these sort of immediate changes in their health as a result of these experiences, perhaps quantum is the mechanism, but there may be other mechanisms as well that I'd want to explore. But I think that really seriously considering these kinds of phenomena has got, I mean, how can, it's so frustrating to me.
Get to know Siri at apple.com.
My phone just wanted to chime in there. That even with these kinds of things out there, I think it's so short-sighted of mainstream scientists to sort of just rule them out of hand, and really important that we seriously investigate the possibility that you can get really sudden changes in health as a result of the kinds of experiences that you've been encouraging.
So one of the things, Jonathan, because we haven't gotten together in a long time, and we're going to plan on get together during the holidays, is that we're partnering with the University of California, San Diego, and their microbiology research facility there, and in a week-long event, because I'm all about the rigor also. So what does this mean? I mean, yes, so the person has a subjective experience. Sure, we see some, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, not 5 times. We're seeing the same similar patterns in the brain that take place, similar regions that become excited. And because it's happening so many times, there's a pattern, there's a trend there. And when we see those people have those moments, we immediately draw their blood. And then 24 hours later, we draw their blood again. And we're looking at about 2,800 plus different metabolites that the cells excrete that determine whether a cell is actually in growth and repair, if it's flourishing, or if it's in disease, or it's breaking down, or it's out of balance. And we see these dramatic trends of the majority of the people in a week-long event that are novice meditators that really haven't had a whole lot of exposure to meditation. They've come to the event, they practice the online course, or maybe they even see the online course. But if they go all in, and you see these dramatic changes in cellular metabolites for the better, And I asked the scientist to explain to the audience, what does this mean? And he says, this data suggests that there are dramatic changes happening in the environment biologically. Now, the problem is we're in a ballroom, and all ballrooms look pretty much the same, and there's not a whole lot happening. There's no real huge environmental shifts taking place in a ballroom, but it suggests then that something is happening in some exchange of information. It must be selecting and instructing certain receptors on the cell to do what it does. And if the information is not coming from their senses because they're in a meditation, then there's only one place we're hypothesizing that information comes from, and that is energy and frequency. Now that doesn't mean we have all the answers, but the data suggests, I'm not saying this, but the data suggests that there are very profound epigenetic changes when there is an interaction with energy. And if you can sustain that, at the end of 1 week, those novice meditators, all of a sudden, their biology is looking like someone who is an advanced meditator, who we have some really good volcano maps and plots to be able to say, wow, there's growth and repair going on. So what we're trying to do is demystify that process. And I use the word quantum because I like the idea of it being an invisible realm of energy that exists beyond our senses, that if we're unaware of it, it doesn't exist for us. Right? We've got to become aware of it, put our attention on it, and keep our attention on it, more attention on that and less attention on us in our dual polarized world, that if you can sustain that state, that unifying field somehow, when the person has that connection, the word connection is used so much. And when we see the areas of the brain that are associated with really positive emotional experiences lighting up, we know the person is not there. That's not contrived, on some level, it's a real life experience. And sometimes it gets so abstract that the person has a very interdimensional, very profound experience that simulates taking some type of psilocybin or some type of substance. I think the brain releases similar chemicals that fit in the same receptor sites, and all of a sudden the veil, the illusion is removed, and they see that there's infinite number of realities that we get to experience. That probably is that 99% of reality that our brain has been molded and shaped to no longer perceive. So one of the things that I just like to talk about before we open it up to question is the concept called the nows, the nested observer windows. I love this concept, and I'm so happy that you'll take a moment to explain it.
Sure. I just would, I would encourage your colleagues at, you're saying UC San Diego, to publish this in refereed journals. I look forward to reviewing it. And this is exactly the kind of cutting edge types of research that I think is really important for helping scientists to become more open-minded about the types of phenomena they're open to.
Well, let me just say this. Let me say, Jonathan, the moment the paper is published in January, I will send you the article.
Okay.
We're going to make scientific history with this one.
Okay. I'm really excited to see that. And I'd also say, just with respect to the field in which this is taking place, the quantum field, I think, is certainly should be kept on the table, but also I think the electromagnetic field is also a really, that's what we're measuring, right, with all these different things. And there's some really interesting evidence that the electromagnetic field may actually be sort of the locus of consciousness, and so the resonance is actually happening at the electrical level. And we're actually working on a special issue in Frontiers, looking at scientific evidence of the possibility that the electromagnetic field may be where the sort of seat of consciousness takes place. But yes, thank you for inviting me to talk about nested observer windows. So the idea is, analogy, I think, is sort of helpful here. So you may have seen these pictures where every pixel of the picture is itself a picture. So you basically have a painting that's made of smaller paintings. And you could imagine that each one of those smaller paintings was itself constituted of lower level pictures. So you basically have pictures within pictures within pictures, where each picture is simultaneously both a window itself and also a pixel to the next level up. And our conjecture is that this may be sort of the organization of the mind, that the experience that you're having is a super high level window, which is constituted of lower level windows, which themselves are constituted of lower level windows. And every window is having its own separate a resonance, and then is coordinating with the resonances of the other windows through those three principles of synchrony, which is simultaneity, coherence, which is multiple windows coordinating with each other at one level, and cross-frequency coupling, which is the harmonics. And we think that this basic structure may provide a scale-free way of thinking about the way in which information processing is organized, and possibly consciousness. And one of the ideas that I like to entertain without necessarily endorsing is this notion of panpsychism, that we may be sort of stacked levels of consciousnesses upon consciousnesses upon consciousnesses. And this also raises the possibility that perhaps each one of us is a tile in yet some higher level window, which and then in turn could be a tile in yet a higher level window. So it provides a possible architecture for thinking about a real high to low scale of consciousness. One other point I wanted to make, which is I think a really interesting and intriguing thing to think about, is when people have these experiences of non-duality, oftentimes they come back and they'll say something like it was realer than real, that's the real truth is out there, and we're living in this sort of much like Plato's, we're just seeing the shadows on the cave. And I think that's also a really interesting conjecture that sages throughout history have resonated with. But at the same time, it's always hard to know, where the ground truth really resides. But from my perspective, each person has to really make that decision at some level for themselves. So if a person has one of these blast open experiences and they have come to the conclusion that is the ultimate reality, then who am I or anybody else to say, no, that's not reality, this is.
Sure. And those pictures or those patterns within patterns really are a great way to explain infinity too. I mean, because it's consciousness in the never-ending discovery of itself through these different windows, and there's so much order, so much information, so much holism in each picture that you can never take holism out of it, right? Because on some level, the information is in the parts. So this wholeness in parts, or we're part of the whole, right? And so it has a great way of giving us hope that there's something to reality beyond our senses, beyond this VR headset that we're experiencing, the illusion of separation in 3 dimensions, when in fact, when you take off the headset, there's nothing physical and material there. It's just energy. It's just frequency. It's just information. And the way our brain creates that isn't just, many people just say, oh, frequency is just a line that goes like that. That's not frequency at all. That's how we actually measure it, or that's how we can decode it. But the electromagnetism that's created in its multiple ways is information, and there's nothing there but energy. So I love the idea, because to me it explains infinity really well, because it goes on forever and there's never a moment where there's not wholeness in the parts. So it gives me hope that that's who we really are, that we're connected to something greater.
Yeah, I love that. I've always been sympathetic to that idea. I will say that I have a little bit of a bias towards wanting there to be a bottom and a top. So like there's this old story of turtles all the way down, and I want to feel like there is a lowest level that you have nested observer windows infinitely down, And my intuition also is that nested observer windows infinitely up is just a sort of mind-blowing for me. But I can imagine that there gets to be some sort of top window, who's to say where that is, where everything becomes connected. And the only other thing I would say here is that just be careful, because you never know when you're at the top window, right? You may think you're at the top window, but there could be a window higher. So even though I feel like there's a top window, I want to always think there could be a higher one.
I don't think that the unlimited intelligence that somehow is observing this all into reality would ever have an end, because that's consciousness in its never-ending discovery of itself. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for this great conversation. We're going to get together during the holidays. We'll open a bottle of wine and we'll go down a few rabbit holes. But I do want to give the audience, Adam, an opportunity to ask Jonathan or myself any questions, and it would be cool if we could keep it to the topic. So, thank you so much, Jonathan.
My pleasure, Joe.
Wonderful. Well, we'd love to hear from anybody on the call who has a question for either Dr. Joe or Jonathan on any of the subject matter that they just discussed with us today. So if you have a question for either Dr. Joe or Jonathan, then please raise your hand now. If I call on you to ask your question, then you'll see a message on your screen that says that the host is allowing you to talk. And at that stage, you simply unmute yourself. Once you've finished your question, then I'll mute you again. And in the interest of time, and so we can get to as many people as possible today, we ask you to just keep it to one question per person and keep the question as direct and concise as you can. So the first person I'd like to call on today is Kay.
My question is, any additional hints upon from really profound meditation? I have a shoulder injury with tears, rips, the whole 9 yards, and I meditate tremendously and I've had good end result. I'm down to my last segment of a torn bicep tendon, trying to move some energy. How can I expand to create a new synapse in order to get my brain connected with my muscles to formulate a healing process?
Okay, I'll take this one, Jonathan. All right, listen. Injury, trauma, when there's chronic pain, the thing about it is we keep our attention on it, right? And because it hurts, and when it hurts, it's a signal for us to pay attention to it. The problem is when it gets chronic and we interact with that pain, we actually develop circuitry from our experience of it to stay connected to it or stay aware of it. We have a mind for it. So some of the research that has been done on mental rehearsal, if you truly wanted to take this on, both from mind and from your physical body and experience, shows that if you close your eyes and you truly rehearse the activity and you stay present with what you're doing, just like the piano players learning scales and chords in their mind and practicing the scales and chords, they install circuitry, look like they've had the experience. They install circuitry, look like they've already done it, right? So by rehearsal, the brain can't tell the difference if you're truly present between the real life experience that you're having and what you're imagining in your mind. If you're truly present, that moment then for somehow the causes circuitry to upscale itself. And so now the brain is being primed. It's no longer a record of the past. You're installing hardware. Keep at it and keep doing it, firing and wiring. You create more automatic processes. It becomes more like a software program. And you take those people that never played the piano before but rehearsed for 2 hours a day for 5 days, you set them in front of the piano and like magic, they can play those scales and chords, but they never lifted a finger. So they're priming the brain for the activity. So mental rehearsal is an important element, but by the same means of people who close their eyes and practice doing bicep curls, and they put their mind behind it and they put an emotion behind it, like stronger, harder, more intense. That the act of doing that in their mind, just for an hour a day for 2 weeks, causes their muscle strength to increase by more than 13%. Now the body is looking like it's actually having the experience, it's stronger, but they haven't lifted any weights. And so the body all of a sudden is responding to the mind in a very direct way. So it was done at Cleveland Clinic, and it was a pretty popular study. And so if you take that and you're serious about retraining yourself, you would have to change that network of the experience of pain that you've had up until this past. And not to say that the pain isn't real. I'm just saying that your attention, your experience of pain and limitation has created a mind to pay attention to it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in the process of change, you would have to agree with me that if the pain went away, that there would be a change in circuitry to some degree. So if you can start making new circuitry, a new mind, by rehearsing some movements that could take place in your bicep tendon or in your shoulder. In other words, if you only have 10 degrees of abduction, moving it away, maybe you practice in your mind, you do it with your good arm and you get what that feels like. And then you start practicing in your other arm, rehearsing it to a certain point, then changing the range of motion forwards and changing the range of motion backwards and turning your hand all the way out and turning your hand all the way in your mind, practicing these things, repeating them, rehearsing them. Then on some level, you could potentially and theoretically begin to do the same thing as those guys that created a change in their muscle strength by thought alone. Your body could believe it's being rehabbed and you're moving it past the point where you normally would do it in your mind. And in time, you may see your body respond to your mind. So that's what you could do from a mindfulness standpoint. But then because I don't know the severity of your injury, I don't know how bad the bicep tendon is torn, I have no idea what you've done to this point. There's so many variables just from a clinical standpoint that it makes it difficult for me to answer. But I will tell you that with the proper physical rehabilitation, by doing the proper movements to strengthen certain other tissues and really challenging the joint in healthy ways without injuring it, that there's great research to show that you can cause your body to become more flexible and reduce inflammation, and range of motion begins to improve. And if that's the case, pain levels can also drop. Now, there have been, one of the things that we noticed, when we have had remote coherence healings, and the University of California, San Diego also spent pretty much the last 30 days looking at the data. One of the things that responds really well to these coherence healings is pain and inflammation. That just seems to be one of the big things, along with fatigue. So I would suggest that someone from my staff will reach out to you, and we have both authorized and official coherence healing groups, and people have had significant changes in musculoskeletal injuries as a result of a group of people intervening in the right way. So try those things out. That's the short story. But of course, then make sure that you check in with your doctor. And if things are getting worse and not improving, it's time to change it up. It's time to take another step.
Thank you so much for your question, Kay. Next person, Phoenix, you're on the call.
Hello there, Dr. Joe. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Phoenix.
Very good. So I have a short question, which is that Dr. Schuller's explanation of the nesting of the windows very much reminds me of fractals, which, if I remember correctly, are standing waves of coherent information. Can either one of you please maybe say more about that?
Oh, I'm going to cry. This is such a great conversation because I would say that those standing waves of energy and information that are at such high levels of order are those pictures. And the hologram of three-dimensional reality is an outpicturing of those patterns. And so there's patterns within those patterns and within those patterns and those fractals. And you look at a fractal, it goes on for eternity. And I believe that that's exactly what happens also in the cell when it begins to interact with such profound energy, that there's the electromagnetism that's released from the cell is producing, a greater emission of order and light. So I'm going to leave it at that and let Jonathan run here.
Yeah, thank you. The metaphor of fractals is spot on, and that is very much the way I think about it. With one possible exception, and I may have this wrong, but my understanding of fractals is that you basically have the very same pattern repeating itself at each different level. And in the model that we're thinking about, the nested observer windows, the idea is that they're analogs at the different levels, but there are different processes that are going on. So there may be core constant elements that you see from one level to the next, but also there's a diversity in the nature of the windows and the kind of information that it's integrating, and so on. So I would call it sort of fractal-like.
Yeah, and the only thing I would want to add to that, Phoenix, is that you can't freeze the frame. You can't see this as static. They're not static. They're never-ending patterns that change by moment to moment, and there's infinite numbers of those based on, as according to my understanding, is whatever the resonance of the observer is. So you can't exclude yourself from the equation because you have your own signature energetically, and the brain has its own patterns, and when the patterns change in the brain and subtle networks, again, summate into more synchrony or resonance or order, or they cross frequency couple or whatever, that exchange of energy and information is causing the brain to access different information that could or cause the person to perceive a whole different experience of those patterns. And I think it's the observer can't be excluded from the equation. The mind has to be included into the experience. And so there's infinite number of those patterns, infinite number of information, infinite number of possibilities equal to the observer and their level of mind.
Well, thank you, Phoenix. That was an excellent question. Next person on the call is John.
2 questions. Do you believe that someone with Parkinson's disease through meditation can help repair the dopamine neurons to supply more dopamine to the body to help with a movement disorder? And do you think possibly that can be attained through remote cohesive healing?
Okay, I'll start with this one. There's been great research done on the placebo with Parkinson's disease. You know, it's one of the things that respond really well to the placebo effect. You know, you can condition patients into believing that they're getting a really profound dose of something that's going to increase their dopamine levels, and they get an inert injection of nothing more than a saline solution, or sometimes even distilled water, which creates a little bit of pain and it makes the experience more memorable. But the idea of telling the patient with enthusiasm that you've got a new cure for Parkinson's disease and it's worked in a certain percentage of people, the moment that person hears that, a certain percentage of those people will actually image a future reality. They'll actually see themselves in some level being the person that could respond. They're actually taking themselves out of their experience of their memory of themselves, and they're placing an experience of themselves as a new memory of themselves ahead of time. Now, the person who's optimistic, the person who is grateful, the person who's enthusiastic, the person who's inspired by the experience is now changing their emotional state as well. And the body's so objective that it will believe it's living, in fact, in a different environment, because the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion. And so the person is actually experiencing the emotional event ahead of the actual event. And their body's so objective, it's believing it's living in a different environment, a different reality. And somehow the environment signals the gene, because that's epigenetics. And a good percentage of those people have a dramatic change in their dopamine levels, up to 200 times more dopamine in their brain. I mean, by thought alone, their nervous system becomes the pharmacy that makes their own dopamine, and they have a dramatic change in their symptoms. And at first they just said, oh, it was the placebo effect. And this one Italian MD PhD said, well, they got to be making dopamine if that's the case. So what they did is they devised this experiment, and they said, okay, look, if the brain is making its own dopamine, then the dopamine will fit into the receptor sites of the brain. And it's like cars parking in a parking lot. If you get enough cars parking in the parking lot, all the parking lot spaces are taken. Think of dopamine receptors like that. So if the brain's making dopamine, all the parking spots are taken. So if they put a radioactive dye in the brain and there's no absorption of that radioactive dye, they're saying the person's making dopamine. if the brain isn't making dopamine, then there's no dopamine in the parking spots, and the radioactive dye will fill in there when they image the brain, and you can see it, and you can see that there's no dopamine because the receptor sites are housing that radioactive substance. So when they did it, they found that they were making 200 times the amount of dopamine just by thought alone. The problem is that when the experiment ended and they returned back to their life, and they saw their friends, and they played chess, and they slept in the same bed, and they saw the same caregiver, they returned back to their habituations and their routine. The environment was really controlling the way they were feeling and thinking, and most of them, their symptomatology returned. So, but the question is, do you need an exogenous substance, some inert substance, for you to change your state of being? Or can you just focus on a future potential and begin to emotionally embrace it? The stronger the emotion you feel ahead of the actual experience, the more you'll pay attention to the picture in your mind. And in a sense, you start remembering your future. A thought and a feeling, memory and emotion, or an image and emotion, a stimulus and response, this actually starts conditioning the body emotionally into a new future. Doing that enough times, in other words, many studies on placebo were not one time like that. Many studies, like 6 to 8 weeks of taking a placebo that's that's been claimed to be an antidepressant, and the person's depression goes away and their brain changes. They're making their own pharmacy of antidepressants, but it took them 8 weeks in the study to keep changing their state of being, to use that inert substance as a symbol of hope, a symbol of possibility. The question is, but do you need that? Can you just change your state of being by thought alone? And it turns out that people do that all the time in this work. And so we've had numerous people, John, in this work, and you can ask any of our research team, not one, not two, not three, not four. We have numerous people that had Parkinson's disease, that practiced the meditations with the understanding of what they were doing and why they were doing it, so that the how became instrumental, became very, very meaningful to them. One lady in particular stood on the stage in one event that we had in Mexico, and she never even ordered the book, one of my books, from Amazon. It was delivered to her house, and she never purchased the book. And she left it on the coffee table for the longest time. And then she opened up one of the pages to where we saw the changes, as an example of someone with Parkinson's disease, have dramatic changes in their pre and post measurements. And then she read the book, and she did it, and she had a very significant change. She was so excited because she felt like she was in prison in her body because she had so much spastic paralysis, and she was like freed, and she was on the stage very excited about the explanation. Now, the second part of this is that we've also had people have an interaction with one of those aroused states of high levels of order in their nervous system, and literally after one event, one moment, we had a psychiatrist on the stage in London who was 70 years old and struggled with Parkinson's and tried everything. And in one instant, literally in one instant, he had no longer had tremors. His facial paralysis had changed. He had less pain all over his body. So it tends to be that gamma state that really makes a big difference in what we see with Parkinson's. Now, remote healing, I would recommend that you apply for remote healing. We've had numerous people with all kinds of neurological disorders seem to have a pretty nice change in their state. So we'll take one more question, and then we'll end this. And unless, Jonathan, is there anything you want to say about that? Yeah.
Can you hear me? I wanted to make a couple comments on that. First off, the placebo effect, I think, is really sort of a great success story for where sort of what was initially sort of frontier science dismissed by many in terms of the idea that the mind could impact the body and physical healing in the ways that it can. And now it's widely accepted. So it's a really nice example of phenomena that were initially dismissed by the mainstream at least the extent of the magnitude of placebo effects dismissed, and now widely recognized for its impact. So I'm always encouraging my colleagues to really keep an open mind to frontier science, and the placebo is the power of the placebo is a really powerful example of how things that might have initially once seemed entirely impossible actually turn out to be true. Now, this applies then to the notion, if I'm understanding right, of remote healing. Is that the same thing as intercessory prayer?
Yes, we have a specific principle that we use where but we heal people remotely at a distance, and we get collective networks of observers changing their electromagnetic field, and in a non-local way begin to change the information in the person's field, change the pattern in the field, change matter.
So that, from where I sit in sort of my more conventional space, would be that would be dismissed by a large proportion of my colleagues. But I would argue that dismissing that would be premature, in the same way that dismissing the placebo effects would have been premature in the past, and that it's a really exciting prospect, and I'd love to see that work written up and published and trying to get into the the best possible journals to try to shift the zeitgeist and cause people to become more open to this. And I will say one thing that I've thought about is actually creating a website, and perhaps this is what you're doing, where you have people signing up to be whatever the word you're using. I want to use pray, but I think there's probably a better word. And then you could even do a dose response curve and see, more versus less. And does that impact and people wouldn't even necessarily need to know the magnitude or the number of people who have been assigned to them. So this is there have been some failures in this. There was a major study by Benson that didn't find the effect. So I want to acknowledge that this is an area where it's been controversial, but I think it's a really, really intriguing domain. And I'd encourage you to really go hard on rigorous research.
Yeah. We have so much data on this, Jonathan, because we do some IRB questionnaires pre and post. We've done some epigenetic measurements with buccal epithelial cells. We've been checking to see heart coherence amongst the 10 people or 8 people that are administering the healing, and is there any resonance or coherence taking the heart of the healee at the same exact time and space, right? So we're trying to demystify the process. But what I can tell you is that the responses that we're getting from people's effects are 3 in a row. Tends to be, we tend to do 3, seems to be a good dosing effect. But what we did in the lab just recently at UC San Diego is we took 4 different cells, 4 different types of cells, 4 different petri dishes. 3 of those petri dishes had different types of cancer. And 1 petri dish just had normal cells proliferating in it. And we had a group of 8 people come in, hands over their heart, and put their intention into those different cells. And we measured the amount of energy the cell, how it changed in the cell. And it was really interesting because in the case of the cancer cell, we saw a direct correlation in the change in energy in the pattern that where previously there's been some wind knocked out of a sail of the cancer cells. The interesting phenomenon, though, was that the healthy cells had no change in energy. So on some level, again, we're trying to reduce the probability of it being the placebo effect. And we're trying to demystify the process and change the conversation, because if you have the model and you have the understanding and you can hit a target non-locally, right? And you understand kind of a greater model of how maybe there is an interconnectedness, and the person has a good belief that they can do it. And belief is like pregnancy. Either you do or you don't, either you are or you're not. And you get a collective group of people that can have a certain amount of brain coherence and a certain amount of resonance and a certain amount of heart coherence. Somehow the combination of those two produce non-local effects in 3-dimensional reality. So I have scientists that started off in this study, 3 of them, that were not shaking their heads saying there's just no way this could happen. And then they start seeing these non-local effects, and you got to start talking about information and the quantum information theory, and then it changes everything. Anyway, we went over We won't take a last question, everybody, but gosh, first of all, Jonathan, so love your mind, so love what you're doing in the world. I know that you have such a great research lab, and a lot of the students are always praying that they could be selected to get into your lab. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us, and thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you, Joe. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you, and pleasure sharing thoughts with your audience.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us today. I know you have a very busy schedule, and thank you to everyone on the call. And of course, thank you to Dr. Joe. Our next Dr. Joe Live will be Thursday, December 23rd at our regular time, and will be 1 hour of Q&A with Dr. Joe. And now to our upcoming events. We have 2 week-long advanced retreats coming up very shortly. One is in Cancun, Mexico, from December 6th to 12th, and the other Marco Island, Florida, from January 9th to 15th. Both of those retreats are sold out, but we strongly do suggest that you join the wait list if you would like to attend, just in case circumstances change. Our events team, of course, has a very full schedule of events that are planned for next year, 2022. Those that are nearing finalization as of this time are 2 advanced follow-up retreats, one in Denver in April, and the other in Nashville in October. We also have some week-long advanced retreats planned for Texas in October and Orlando in November. The exact dates for these retreats are still being finalized. The events team are also working to find some suitable other venues for the early parts of next year and into summer. We're still hoping to do a progressive retreat in Poland, July 29th to 31st, but are waiting to see how the world situation unfolds. As things continue to change, our events team are doing the best they can to find safe venues around the world based upon the constantly unfolding situation. For all of the most up-to-date information, however, please look out for our emails and keep checking our events postings on our Unlimited with Dr. Joe Dispenza website. Before we say goodbye today, Dr. Joe, do you have any final words for us?
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, the simple thing is I just want to wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving for those of you who celebrate it. For those of you who don't, it's a day in the United States that we celebrate the things that we're grateful for. And gosh, we should, based on our research in the last 5 years on gratitude, we should be grateful for something every single day because it has dramatic effects on our biology. So find the things that you're grateful for in your life, from the simplest to the most profound, and even make time to be grateful for some of the things you haven't experienced yet that you're looking forward to experiencing, and be present during that day, and make sure that you express gratitude to the people in your life that you love and you care for. And I'm so grateful for so many things. And one of the greatest things is really us, is our community, just the way we execute the great scientific research that's being uncovered that's really, really profound. The testimonies of so many healings that have taken place in this work, so many changes in people's lives. And I know we're faced with very, very big challenges, all of us, in the world that doesn't seem like the same place, but gosh, we have to stay relaxed and awake. We have to stay in our hearts and be in brain and heart coherence, and practicing that every single day, I think, gives us solutions to problems in our life that we can't perceive solutions for. So I just wanted to take a moment and wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving, and thank you, Adam, and my staff for joining the call. Jonathan, happy Thanksgiving to you. Look forward to seeing you during the holiday season.
Well, thank you, and happy Thanksgiving to you, Dr. Joe, and to everyone on the call as well. On behalf of Dr. Joe and the team, thank you for joining us today.